Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. When I think of the Home Guards and the Civil War, I think of the many local Southern forces who operated on the fringes of Union controlled territory. I also think about the Northern forces located in New England along the Canadian border, where they were being vigilant for the possible Confederate incursion. I don't think about the California Home Guard, which is inscribed on this original portrait photograph of Captain S.F. Barker. You can see the inscription in the upper left hand corner of the photograph shown here. If you search the Civil War military service records for Captain Stephen F. Barker, you won't find any paperwork for him. He did, in fact, serve during the late war years, but in a state authorized militia company organized in San Francisco for the sole purpose of protecting California. The company never mustered into federal service, and therefore, Barker and his companions have no official record in the National Archives. Barker, like most residents of California, was not native to the state. He was, in fact, born in 1836 in Washington, Maine, which is a town on the border of the Canadian province of New Brunswick. In 1857, when he was all of 19 years old, he followed the path of so many Americans in the East who were searching for a new life and new opportunities in the West. So he moved to San Francisco. I wasn't able to find out what his exact motivations were for the coast to coast move, but when I think about his life, it's possible that he was inspired by stories of the gold rush and other Western adventures that he had heard during his boyhood. Think about it. He was 8, 9, 10 years old and going into his early teens when all of that activity and action around the West was happening. Now, in San Francisco, once he was there, Barker made a positive impression. According to one report, he was a man of sterling character. Remember, he's all of 19 and then in his early 20s. He was a man of sterling character, had always been very strong physically, and was strong also in the mortal and spiritual sense. In the early history of San Francisco, he was one of the stalwarts to fight for the city's rights. He was not always on the popular side, but he endeavored to be always on the right side. He had to meet with keen opposition and sometimes persecution, but he could stand foursquare to all the winds that blew. That's a great commentary on what Barker's life was like, or how he was viewed by some fellow citizens. Now, Barker's service as an officer began in San Francisco on September 1st, 1864. To put it in perspective, we are a couple months away from the presidential election of 1864. You've got basically an impasse in the Eastern theater of the war where Grant and Meade are bogged down in front of Lee at the Petersburg and Richmond line. And in the western part of the theater, problem is sort of similar. Sherman has figured out the Atlanta campaign, but not quite ended yet, and who knows what's going to come next. Anyway, Barker in California musters into a company called the Templar Guard, which was an unattached volunteer company in California's 2nd Brigade. Now, you students of the Civil War and U.S. military history know that the militia system dates to the very founding of our government. Militias partnered with and were regulated by state authorities. Following the end of the war and beginning a little bit during the war itself, these militias evolved in today's National Guard, which operates as a dual state and federal force. Now, let's go back to Barker. He's pictured here about this time, 1864. It says it on the inscription. He's listed as a captain, but he's wearing the shoulder straps of a first lieutenant. You can see that there is a single bar on his shoulder straps. He's also wearing a distinctive blue, darker blue uniform with epaulets and light blue trim on the collar, cuffs, and trim of his single breasted frock coat. A little different from your prescribed, issued coat that was worn by the Union Army. And because he was in a militia company, they had some leeway on how they could ornament, decorate, design their coats and the rest of their uniforms. Also worthy of note is the backdrop. Look at this painted scene behind him. It's a nautical theme. It shows a fort. It shows a tall ship. And it's very possible that it is a painting of San Francisco Bay. In January 1865, just a few months after he mustered into the service of the California Home Guard, the members of the company voted to change the name from the Templar Guard to the Sherman Guard, and now known also as Company E of the 1st California Infantry. I wasn't able to find out why the men changed the name, but if I were to hazard a guess, it would be related to the success of Major General William Tecumseh Sherman during the late 1864 March through Georgia, popularly known as the March to the Sea, which ended with the capture of Savannah and set the stage for the Carolinas campaign and surrender of Confederate Lieutenant General Joe Johnston and his army. A month after the name change, Barker advanced to captain. That's why you see the inscription, which I think dates to early 1865. They were calling him captain, although they said this is how he looked in 1864. Now, by this time, in early 1865, he and his command moved into a new armory in San Francisco. The future was looking bright. However, in the summer of 1866, California reorganized its militia system, in fact, its entire military system, and established a limit of 80 companies. Some of the companies were disbanded, including the Sherman Guard. So, although the company was no more and during its brief existence as a wartime fighting force saw no combat, its presence and that of other companies played an important role in protecting California and Californians. You students of the Civil War know that California was not the scene of any major military events, yet state authorities approved and constructed forts and other defenses to guard against any attempts to destabilize the state. There were very real threats that Captain Barker and other defenders prepared to face. In Southern California, Confederate sympathizers agitated for disunion. Acts of sabotage by guerrillas and other irregular forces threatened all important mail routes and other public operations. In neighboring New Mexico territory, Confederate military forces led by General Henry H. Sibley invaded with the goal of claiming the Southwest for the Confederate States of America. Union victory in the 1862 Battle of Glorietta Pass stopped the Confederates, who would have likely, or at least tried to invade California. It can be fairly stated that Captain Barker and the Sherman Guard did their part to ensure that California remained in the Union. Following the dissolution of the Sherman Guard in the summer of 1866, Barker became involved in another company, the Sumner Guards, served a one-year term in the California legislature, and prospered in various businesses, including livery stables, freight transport, mining, and farming. He pioneered a voluntary fire department in San Francisco. He accomplished a lot in his life. Later in his life, Barker settled in Oakland, became active as a deacon in the city's first Congregational church, and passed away after a brief illness in 1915. He was 79 years old. He outlived 2 wives, Mary and Ellen, and 4 children survived him. You could find a couple of obituaries in newspapers, and they honor him for his lifetime of achievements as a pioneer of San Francisco and as a role of his defender, as being a defender of California. during the Civil War. So thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.